Hopkins seemed to look through him. The agent's suit sagged as though he'd worn it for a week. It annoyed Slocum. After a life in the military, sloppy civilian dress was difficult to accept. His Marine escort clicked his heels softly and announced, "The Lincoln sitting room, sir." The Secret Service agent leaned to one side and swung the door open, never taking his eyes off the stairway. Larry Parrish, the sandy-haired Ivy League White House chief of staff, was the only one to nod at Slocum as he entered. The others were preoccupied in knots of uneasy conversation. Parrish waved the general into the last empty seat, a hard-backed antique chair next to the president. He then caught President Hopkins's eye. "Everyone's here," he said. The small room, which had once served Abraham Lincoln as an office, was crowded with antiques. This morning it seemed even more crowded by the egos of the handful of powerful men and one woman the president had summoned. Parrish had taken their measure long ago, and he somehow managed to make these egos work together for whatever goals the president chose. He knew people, he knew the system, and he had a finely tuned political sense of how to work the news cycle. "I'm a technician," he would say with a smile when pressed about his role in the government. His eyes went around the circle. To the president's immediate left, an uncomfortable chair in an uncomfortable position, he thought, sat Brent Slocum. Parrish had known Slocum through a decade of Washington receptions. A bundle of powerful muscles on a long frame, Slocum prided himself on physical toughness. The general was the best sort of military man, politically unimaginative, but quick to seize the main issues. Neither a paper pusher nor a cowboy, he had just the kind of solid, capable confidence to command any situation. In that respect, he was like the president, which explained why they got on so well and why the president had wanted him to head the Joint Chiefs. Seated next to Slocum was Alexander Hartwell, the Secretary of Defense, revered as the nastiest infighter in Washington's brutal bureaucracy. Parrish had often thought he was glad Hartwell was their hatchet man. He would make a formidable enemy. A veteran of 20 years in the House, Hartwell had worked the deals reconciling evangelicals to the anti-terror realists. As a reward for bringing such opposites together, Hartwell had demanded and received defense. He sometimes acted, however, as if he had been given the White House. Parrish worked hard to stay one jump ahead of Hartwell and to remind him who was president. Next to Hartwell was Secretary of State Henry Lovelace. Parrish suspected Henry was out of his depth, and so did a lot of other people. They referred to him privately as Secretary Love. Lovelace owed his job to his friendship with the president, dating back to college days. The president was comfortable with him, and his weaknesses were compensated for by the strength of Mary Ellen Davies, the National Security Advisor. It was doubtful anyway whether Davies could have worked with a strong counterpart at state. Mary Ellen Davies had the silver-haired, matronly appearance of a top-drawer school superintendent. It was a facade that some men expected they could bully, but those who tried usually learned to regret it. She remembered slights, she never lost track of her objectives, and she could face down much larger men with a stare that reminded them of their mothers, assuming that their mothers were unstinting disciplinarians. The president had come to rely on her during his 14 months in the White House. Almost dangerously so, Parrish thought. Finally, slumped on a rosewood chair purchased by Mary Todd Lincoln, was the professorial Attorney General, Hyman Levin. How the man could talk. He kept the right-wingers happy, crusading with the vigor of the recently converted. Fortunately, he was a pragmatist who knew how to talk on one line and compromise on another. Any one of the five, with the possible exception of Lovelace, would have dominated another setting, but bluster as they would, in the end they did the president's bidding. Parrish loved watching Hopkins manage them, the greatest exhibit of political skill and personal magnetism he had ever observed. Partly it was physical. Hopkins looked like a president should. Tall, with a magnificent silver mane, a jutting jaw that suggested strength, and soft sparkling eyes that drew people to him. And he sounded like God Almighty, his thunderclap voice rising out of some lower register known only to pipe organs and synthesizers. As a Marine, Colonel Hopkins had been a great warrior, absolutely revered by his men. He carried all that sense of authority into the Oval Office. Lately, though, Parrish had come to believe another newer factor was just as important to Hopkins's authority. Parrish didn't believe morality mattered a fig in politics.